Okay, so right off the bat, I need to establish some parameters for this video. One, SJW is a pejorative term. This is an acronym coined by those that are annoyed with or resentful of a growing set of people, many of them primarily online, who are consistently aggrieved, either personally or on behalf of others, as a result of day-to-day interactions that many find to be entirely unworthy of their outrage. Two, this is not the only group to which the video will apply. It is merely one of the most widely recognized and most vocal groups in the entire online world. The behavior that many people exhibit, which earns them a peer-to-peer tag of SJW, is behavior that aligns very closely with previously published research. And lastly, three, this is an attempt to analyze possible behavioral traits which might explain much of what these people do and why. It is not meant to be a rant against them or their existence. Using this new research as kind of a foundation, I want to rationalize and explain why they exist, as well as why their behavior has only become more severe in recent years and will only continue to grow. The research is linked down below, titled The Tendency for Interpersonal Victimhood, the Personality Construct and Its Consequences. This is psychological research, and as a result, it's very, very dense reading. But the underlying takeaway and the conclusions drawn almost fully explain the entire phenomenon of SJW outrage online and help to rationalize why many of the most prominent online figures associated with it repeat a similar and predictable pattern of behavior in order to garner social attention as a sympathized victim. Before going further, I'd like to read the abstract. The entire published work is over 10,000 words, I believe, so I won't be reading it in full, but the abstract and a few of the studies themselves will showcase a snapshot of what exactly this personality construct truly is. Quote, abstract. In the present research, we introduce a conceptualization of the tendency for interpersonal victimhood, TIV, which we define as an enduring feeling that the self is a victim across different kinds of interpersonal relationships. Then, in a comprehensive set of 8 studies, we develop a measure for this novel personality trait, TIV, and examine its correlates as well as its affective, cognitive, and behavioral consequences. In Part 1, Studies 1A through 1C, we establish the construct of TIV with its 4 dimensions, i.e. need for recognition, moral elitism, lack of empathy, and rumination, and then assess TIV's internal consistency, stability over time, and its effect on the interpretation of ambiguous situations. In Part 2, Studies 2A through 2C, we examine TIV's convergent and discriminant validities using several personality dimensions and the role of attachment styles as conceptual antecedents. In Part 3, Studies 3 through 4, we explore the cognitive and behavioral consequences of TIV. Specifically, we examine the relationships between TIV, negative attribution, and recall biases, and the desire for revenge. Study 3, and the effects of TIV on behavioral revenge. Study 4. The findings highlight the importance of understanding, conceptualizing, and empirically testing TIV, and suggest that victimhood is a stable and meaningful personality tendency. Keywords: victimhood, interpersonal relations, personality, cognitive biases, attachment styles. End quote. This outlines the general efforts of the paper and also gives us a key jumping off point to create our own profile, sort of. Everyone has met or interacted with at some point people that seemingly prove this abstract already. There are those that will habitually find a reason to be upset or to blow small interactions out of proportion. There are those that will outright lie or manufacture instances of personal hurt in order to garner sympathy from their peers. And there are those that continually seek out those kinds of emotional responses beyond what anyone else would ever consider normal. Another relevant paragraph from the study reads as follows, quote, need for recognition refers to victims' motivation to have their victimhood acknowledged and empathized with. At one end of the spectrum, experiencing trauma undermines previous perceptions about the world as a just and moral place. Recognition of one's victimhood helps reestablish victims' confidence in their perception of reality. However, at the other end, when in pain, almost each and every individual seeks acknowledgement of his or her suffering. This encompasses the victim's need for the perpetrator to take responsibility and express feelings of guilt, and to garner compassion and support from others. Similarly, victims of intergroup conflicts and mass atrocities manifest a need for recognition of their suffering, whether by the actual perpetrators or by the general public. End quote. None of this describes a particularly shocking definition of how a victim's emotional response or motivations might operate, but what it should do is allow us to draw connections to modern social media, and for my purposes today, a sub-focus on the games industry. What we need to realize is that social media changed, forever, the way that human beings interact. I would say that's obvious, for sure, but even with this very video and having read this particular research paper, on a personal level, I have been able to learn and modify my own views of why social media has become what we see today. I'll spare everyone the 30-minute long recitation of empirical data in this paper for the actual studies and their findings, but suffice it to say that through this research, TIV, tendency for interpersonal victimhood, absolutely does appear to be a quantifiable personality construct. It is well demonstrated that those who possess these traits will seek out or even manufacture victimhood from scenarios that do not empirically call for it. They will harbor increased animosity as a result, and will hold that animosity longer with a verifiably stronger desire for revenge. One paragraph to corroborate this reads as follows, quote, behaviorally, high TIV individuals were less willing to forgive others after an offense and more likely to seek revenge rather than avoidance, studies 2b and 3, and behave in a revengeful manner, study 4. We argue that one possible explanation for the low avoidant tendencies of high TIV individuals stems from their need for recognition, end quote. However, with all that said, we need to speculate on how and why social media has fueled a meteoric rise in this particular type of behavior. The best explanation I've been able to find is a lack of relative opportunity cost. Social media, primarily sites with far-reaching interactions that avoid real-world names and identities, such as Twitter, that's a great one, have all but eliminated the real-world opportunity cost of frivolous victimhood. In the past, those with high results on a scale of TIV testing would need to validate that mindset in a personal, social environment. Those who seek out a feeling of victimhood and subsequently revenge in many cases would need to do so by interacting with their immediate surroundings. And this creates an incredibly high opportunity cost because once you've chosen something to feel victimized over that your peers deem to be inconsequential, at least in some capacity, they would begin to build a profile about who and what you are, as well as whether or not they should be close to you. If you repeatedly find opportunities to claim victimhood at your school or your workplace, and you do so by hyper-focusing on things like being cut off while talking or speaking, you will begin to systematically decrease the number of coworkers or classmates who are even willing to interact with you at all, ultimately ending in peer-enforced isolation because you are not worth the potential drawback of becoming a target for the victimization and revenge-based mindset. This kind of opportunity cost very naturally limits the behavior, at least in some ways, but social media sites like Twitter have stripped away that barrier. The ability to socialize in pseudo-interpersonal relationships with hundreds of millions of other people at the press of a button has made it so that there is no relative opportunity cost, other than finding different people who have not yet been subjected to your horrible behavior. You don't need to spend the time or the money or the resources to actually go and physically socialize. You don't need to cultivate those relationships with commuting trips and gas money and real-world scheduling. You can simply jump from community to community at will and indulge these hypersensitive victimhood personality traits. What does this do? Pretty simple. It leads inexorably to an explosion of victimized outbursts all over social media, with twitlongers and threads of grievances that are shared purposefully as to validate their desire for gratification to the widest audience possible instead of being handled in a personal, private way. And since the algorithmic promotion on such platforms will favor both positive and negative feedback equally, even at times negative feedback it will value more, this quest for victimhood status, at least in some capacities, actually creates, in a lot of circumstances, a larger following, even financial gain as a result. I'd like to provide a couple of examples here for behavior that might qualify as a snapshot of TIV in action. Please keep in mind that anyone who were to see these names on screen and go out of their way to attack or demean those that are shown might very well be playing into the exact thing that they crave, because the only actual method for diffusing this type of behavior is to understand what it is precisely, why it occurs, and starve it out of existence. The first example would be Jennifer Sherrill, lead game designer at Inside BBI. In the summer of 2020, when there was a flood of Me Too allegations about sexual misconduct in the general gaming industry, she tweeted the following, quote, "I need to leave. I need to go outside and breathe. I can't see this. Men having all the receipts ready to discredit the people they hurt, all your alarm bells should go off. This is my worst nightmare. This is why I will never, ever say what happened to me. Fellow survivors, you can DM me, but I'll be outside. I can't read tweets anymore. I've thrown up twice already. Have you ever cried so hard that you couldn't breathe and your whole body hurts and it's barely crying and more screaming because it's impossible to do this? I wish I was dead the same way I wished I was dead 2 years ago. I can't protect myself and I can't protect others. They will find reasons to discredit us, why we deserved it, why they are the victims, why we should not be believed, why we should be isolated. I feel the setback of my own healing in my bones, the people I have failed to protect by not talking. I used to love this industry with all my heart and all my soul. Now everything in it makes me feel scared." End quote. This is a whole lot. The language used, the hyperbole, the aggressive assertion that she is screaming, vomiting, and wants to die, all because some of the men who were accused of wrongdoing, an action that in and of itself could be an exemplification of the search for victimhood through a strong TIV drive, were able to prove with receipts their innocence. It's pretty insane. The anger that men would have the receipts and be able to refute a lie for the sake of false victimhood with truth, followed by a rather strange contradiction internally where she states, "This is why I will never, ever say what happened to me," but also states later on, "The people I have failed to protect by not talking," further exacerbating her own sense of victimhood at all of this, very possibly indicates that this entire public display has no purpose other than capitalizing on a widespread emotional movement that's happening in the broader industry, where the victimized gratification is flowing freely. Another example, Twitch, the largest live streaming platform in the world as it stands today, has officially removed the word blind playthrough from its tags after feedback over ableist language. The change was coined as a push for inclusivity, but anecdotally, no single person I have yet to see, period, not a single one, has expressed anything other than just raw confusion. This push for inclusivity could very well be an example of TIV in action, as an extremely small subset of viewers internalized what is, in reality, nothing of note and not a slight or an insult meant to harm anyone ever, instead as an opportunity to be offended. The interesting angle comes when we realize that policy changes like this are driven by a tiny subset of the wider audience. However, that tiny subset is by far the most vocal. Some would assume that this is because they seek out problems in a deliberate, conscious effort to harm those around them or to be a nuisance, but understanding what the TIV personality construct entails, it might be something entirely subliminal and unconscious. Think of it this way. Existing personality types include introvert and extrovert. An introvert derives energy, even unconsciously, from being alone or somewhat isolated. Their space and internal reflection are key in the process of recharging after being drained. This does not mean that they can't exist perfectly well in large gatherings or complex social environments, but their primary method of being at ease with themselves tends to align with being alone or having space for themselves. However, extroverts are precisely the opposite. An extrovert derives energy from social scenarios. They are able to be alone, for sure, but that isolation can be draining or even uncomfortable to them. For an extrovert, their preferred state of being is, generally speaking, one that holds a great deal of social interaction, and this desire is not always conscious. What we might be seeing right now is a group of people who derive energy from being victimized, whether on behalf of themselves or an entirely separate group, and the subsequent support that they receive. The sympathy, the financial gain, the kind words, or social connections. A group with that kind of drive having access to an unlimited world of peer-to-peer interactions online will become increasingly vocal and will never be forced to retreat based on the immediate social cost of their actions. This group might even then be able to rise in their field as those feelings of hurt are validated and rewarded, which can lead to various repercussions to the health and well-being of any workplace, industry, or online community over time. Another relevant example could be seen with Kotaku in an article published April of 2019, titled "Super Smash Bros. Ultimate's Persona 5 DLC includes a disability slur." Except it doesn't. This article was published before they received, having requested one at the time, a response from Nintendo and stated in the definitive that the song contains a disability slur. However, that was incorrect, and Kotaku UK was forced to issue an apology on behalf of writer Lauren Kate Dale. I would not speculate that this writer listened to the lyrics intently while looking for a reason to claim that the song victimizes a particular group. I would instead speculate that upon hearing the nondescript word being spoken, which could have been offensive, this writer subconsciously seized upon it and felt compelled to write an article about how the song is hateful for using a disability slur. Yet another gaming journalist took it upon herself to post 4 images of female game characters from notable and widely beloved franchises, and her tag was "Men. I don't want to play as a girl. Deal with it." The response, about as predictable as it gets. These are massively popular games that men all over the world enjoy. These are games with a supermajority of players that are men, and they are games that sold incredibly well with both user and critical acclaim. The backlash was immediate and well justified, and her response was to pivot towards a claim that criticism of her and her vast pejorative generalization of all men was invalidating what a woman has been through, that she would continue to speak against the toxic behavior that women experience, and that she needed to write about it again. But this was spawned in its entirety with an overwhelming majority of polite, factual replies from her own post that generalized, incorrectly I might add, the attitudes of men towards certain gaming characters. If we recall the personality traits for TIV from the research down below, we will find that there is a tendency to focus on negative aspects of day-to-day life, which the individual then regards with higher levels of anger, a self-absorbed mentality of importance, and an increased desire for revenge, or validation through their perceived aggressor's remorse. This could lead to, for example, a gaming journalist once again writing about how horrible and disgusting their own audience is, because they seek to shame the very players they write for after those players failed to express shame and regret upon being overgeneralized in a distinctly incorrect way. There are innumerable examples that start to make much more sense, especially considered within an overarching pattern of individual behavior when viewed through the lens of a TIV personality construct. One final possibility would be Zombie Unicorn, known most widely for her participation in the failed online marketing stunt Bully Hunters. Bully Hunters was an initiative in which female CSGO players would be able to call some sort of hotline or some form of request and get a higher skilled player to come in and punish anyone who insulted or demeaned them. The initiative was officially sponsored by SteelSeries after they were pitched the idea as a way to combat online harassment, but after allegations arose that the actual Bully Hunter agents themselves were more abusive than those that they were called in against, and after Zombie Unicorn herself came under fire for past tweets, the endeavor eventually flat out failed. Notice the pattern, however. In an online world where anonymity and fleeting interactions lead to insults being thrown that get under your skin but fade quickly after, some players feel hyper-victimized. This is a reality across almost any online player versus player oriented game, period. That's an indisputable truth. They not only focus more intensely on that sense of being a victim, but harbor stronger feelings of anger and a desire for revenge. Bully hunters could be called so that the ones throwing insults, a reality that, again, any person familiar with online gaming will know is a constant truth, could be punished for their gratification in real time, and the hunters themselves became more abusive than those that were causing them to be called. TIV in a perfectly captured snapshot. Anyways, Zombie Unicorn, in response to Corsair posting their support for the Black Lives Matter movement, rotated the focus once again back to her for a slight that she felt had been levied against her previously. The tweet reads as follows, quote, "Nice to see them finally speaking up, but Corsair needs to make sure that includes women and not sexualizing their bodies. They expressed heavy interest in sponsoring me until I started body painting. Told my agent a higher up didn't want to be associated with anything sexual." End quote. Once again, through the lens of a tendency towards interpersonal victimhood, when the online social media-driven world creates a pseudo-interpersonal environment where Twitter accounts, even entire companies online, can be interacted with as if they were a single person through a marketing manager or a community manager or social media manager, anything like that, Zombie Unicorn took an entirely unrelated event with no mention of her that fundamentally is not connected to anything about her as an opportunity to readdress a previous grievance. Harken back to TIV causing a longer focus on obtaining some sort of punishment for the wrongs that others consider to be irrelevant and mundane. They also desire that the aggressor feel personally ashamed or somehow exhibit regret for those actions, because Corsair didn't want to sponsor body painting streams. A company not wanting to sponsor you is about as trivial as it gets. I have had many different sponsors decide that my content should not be endorsed, and I totally understand that. I don't wait weeks or even months to try and levy public accusations that they are sexist or prejudicial on Twitter. But instead of viewing Zombie Unicorn's behavior as intentionally vindictive, this personality research down below might indicate something more ingrained in her entire personality. The list of examples would never end. Every one of you watching this right now probably knows a dozen more at least, those that seek out victimhood and harbor ill will long after a trivial or standard interpersonal disagreement takes place. These grudges have become profitable, with GoFundMes and other fundraisers for those that claim victimhood, and the cycle of accusations leading to reward has only been increasing. Social media eliminated the barriers, and those with a tendency towards interpersonal victimhood could find it faster and easier than ever before. They could benefit socially, financially, and professionally from that behavior, which only exacerbated the problem once again. And for me, reading all of this research and understanding that many of the things I consider to be intentional, vindictive, or deliberate choices might just be evidence of an underlying personality construct that has been allowed to spiral out of control by a world that no longer intrinsically punishes that kind of behavior. Summarily, TIV to me explains a great deal about why the online social justice and outrage-driven communities operate. It explains why they do the things that they do, why their motivations might even be entirely unconscious, and how I can interact with them better moving forward from a personal standpoint. I'll probably still struggle with the obvious solution of starving them of these victimhood opportunities, but at the very least, I learned something. That's it though. Links down below, a bunch of them. If I get booted off of YouTube for content like this, you can find me on Odyssey. There's another YouTube channel to check out who helped me with my PC hardware. There's an Amazon affiliate link for your gaming related needs, whatever it may be, and some other stuff as well, like Locals, just a better Patreon alternative to support the channel, and whatever else. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.